Your relationship with money matters. I'm Michelle Perkins, and this is the Money and You podcast, where I will be breaking down your relationship with money, offering tough love money tips, and a money dating plan that will focus on lifting the barriers to success to help pave the way for better money practices and increased wealth. It's time to take control to live a limit-free life. It starts today. Hello, and welcome to the Money and You Show. I'm Michelle Perkins, your host, and so glad you're here. We have a terrific guest today who's going to really, I think, transform your thinking around connecting and networking and building connections that will also be a huge way to increase your wealth and your, however you earn a living. It's going to come in very importantly into that realm. So I want to introduce Jen Nash. Jen is a connector in chief. Jen Nash helps people add more meaning to their lives through connection. She's a master facilitator, author, sought-after executive coach, and corporate speaker. With over 20 years working as an entrepreneur, building a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio and offering consulting services to Fortune 100 pharma, health, tech, and finance giants, Jen Nash now regularly inspires and supports entrepreneurs to deepen their connections of all the good things in life: happiness, growth, and sustained community. Born in Canada and raised around the world in such countries as Hong Kong, Japan, and Australia, Jennifer is an IFC certified executive coach and a graduate of the Coach for Life program. She studied communication design at Parsons and the New School for Social Research in New York City. When not traveling the globe, learning new ways to say thank you and finding bright souls with whom to foster lifelong friendships, Jen Nash can be seen biking around New York City, Los Angeles, or striding around El Centro in San Miguel Allende, Mexico. Jen, welcome.
Thank you. You gotta love an intro like that.
Yeah, it's a great intro. It makes us all visualize you striding and biking. I love that part. So it sounds like a very limit-free life to me. So that I really love. I'm so excited that you're here today, and we spoke for a little bit, and you have so much to share. So for the people coming into this show who really want to be focused on their money relationship, I'd love to start there with a little background about you, and then kind of how you made some of the career and life decisions you made, and some of the money decisions that prompted, some of the adventures that you've had.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because when someone recently asked me, like, what was foundational in my life and what shaped my relationship to money. And, I hadn't actually thought about it to the degree that I have right now. And I realized I grew up an expat. My parents were not particularly materialistic. They weren't like thing buyers. They spent their money on trips and food and experiences, interesting museums and what can we show the kids that will expand their horizons. That's my parents. But at the same time, we got allowances, and I was very aware that my brother was a spender and I was a saver / hoarder. In fact, I was telling a friend the other day, I once stole money from my mom so I could deposit it in the bank and watch my bank book go up. Because this is like way back in the day when we had bank books and there were little printed totals on them. And I just loved watching it go up. So I was like a saver from a young age. And my dad, unfortunately, died when I was 18, and it threw my mom into absolute financial, fear. Right. She really just was suddenly left with just a house. He'd spent most of their savings before he died, and so she really had to scuttle to get things sorted. And I think her financial insecurities definitely impacted me. And all through my 20s, I on one side, loved making money. I worked in advertising. I made six figures starting by the time I was 26. But I also had a passion for learning more, doing something that was a little out of the box. And I really wanted more freedom in my life. And so that's how I started reading and learning about learning from books about passive income. And I know this sounds a bit trite, but reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad and the Cash Flow Quadrant absolutely changed my money mindset and gave me perspective. And it forced me to get into real estate, even though that was absolutely not what I did. I was a writer. I worked in advertising as a creative director and eventually a content strategist. Real estate is completely out of my, bailiwick, I think is the expression. And it was a really interesting journey.
I really appreciate you bringing up your background, because that's where a lot of our money perspective and our money beliefs come from. And so it's important for people to hear that it's worthwhile to look back and see, what was my mom like? What was my dad like? What happened? What transpired that created scenarios that made me think about money, and how did I think about it? So the whole money relationship and money mindset is really about awareness and about, taking stock of your money situation and what that's really created in your mind. So I really appreciate that you went there with this. And everything you said, perspective is everything. That really is all this is about, is just beliefs and perspective. And of course, that's a beautiful thing, because that can be changed. If your belief and your perspective isn't working or taking you down roads that shouldn't, then that can be shifted. So it sounds like you had an early relationship with money. If you were worried about saving and taking money from your mom so that you could save more, that sounds like you were connected with money in a way early on. Whereas a lot of people are sort of money avoiders, and they never think about it, and they just, just move through their lives and things happen to them with money versus trying to control it a little bit. Do you feel like in trying to control it, how did that feel? Did that cause stress, or did that help you to feel more free?
I mean, I think if you're talking about stepping into real estate, for me, it helped me feel more free. And it's interesting because, of course, I have many cohorts and, former, people that I was working with who are still doing the same thing that they were doing 20 years ago, and realizing that they need an exit plan. And they're all wondering, we're going to need a pay, source, but what are we going to do? So I think by getting into real estate in my early 30s, that created not only, a stream of passive income for me to be able to step out of the advertising marketing world and focus on writing a book, being an executive coach, coaching and training companies. It gave me that freedom because, my necessities were met. So I think control, absolutely. It gives you more control. And I always say money equals choices, money equals freedom. Money absolutely does not buy you happiness, though. It's a bummer, but it doesn't.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, and unfortunately, we had a little Zoom glitch in the middle of what you were saying about the cash flow quadrant. So we got most of it, but can you give us a little sort of just description of that cash flow quadrant that you're referring to?
I think if you've heard of the game Cash Flow Quadrant, I think it's a wonderful game. The game is to, if you can get that done, you win.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great, and it's very, very interesting place to start. I think reading books is, how did you ever decide to pick up Rich Dad Poor Dad?
I don't entirely know, actually. It's a good question. I read a lot of investing books. I read, the classics, The Wealthy Barber, anything by Napoleon Hill, The Millionaire Next Door. I was just really curious. As far as investing, my favorite book, which I think someone gifted me in, I don't know, sometime after 2010, is, The Smartest Portfolio You'll Ever Own. It's a wonderful book. and I'm gonna murder the author's name. So I know his first name's Dan.
Okay. That's great.
But
That's
I
one I
mean, I
haven't
think
heard.
if people are looking, yeah, I think if people are looking for guidance and they don't have, like, I didn't have any family in real estate, right? I knew no one. And, part of the way I moved forward was connecting with everyone and anyone who knew anyone who was doing real estate. Hey,
Yeah.
I mean, I quit my job and I went and interned as a property manager for 6 months.
Huh.
In hindsight, terrible idea. Property management is not that complicated, but I was truly terrified. I really was.
Interesting. So you felt, at least financially, like you could quit your job and jump into this. Did you do anything to make sure that that was?
So I actually got paid,
Okay.
but I went from making over six figures to like $25,000. My room and board was free. So basically I wasn't losing or spending any money, but I wasn't making any money. So I took 6 months. And then at the end of that, training period, I realized very quickly, oh no, I got to go back and get a job making good cash again so I can get mortgages, and that's the way forward. Then I used my salary to basically enable myself to qualify for mortgages.
Got it. Okay, great. And then, and so you did that for how long? Are you still doing it now?
Yep, I'm still doing it.
Okay.
So I've been doing it for over a decade and a half.
Wonderful. And how did you get into coaching?
It's interesting. I got into coaching probably because I got a coach, but even before that, I was really passionate about female financial empowerment. And in 2016, my original Instagram handle was Money Instigator. I had a very uncomfortable conversation with the head of HR at an ad agency where I was working at. And I had realized that they owed me over $30,000 of back pay because they'd made a clerical error with how much I was being paid per hour. And they said, well, you should have caught it sooner. I said, I don't see how that's, relative. Like, I've caught it and you owe me money. And the conversation was so uncomfortable. At one point, I said to the HR woman, I said, can we just take a pause? I need to take a breath. This is so uncomfortable. And she looked at me and she said, really? I'm fine. Wow. And I thought, wow, okay. So I've been doing this for decades, working as a consultant at ad agencies. I'm having an uncomfortable conversation around money. What's a 22-year-old going to do? What's a 30-year-old going to do? Yeah. So I built up Money Instigator on Instagram, and I built up a website, which is still there. And I spent a lot of time, really helping women and coaching them around, raises, negotiation, and self-worth. There were some scalability issues with the vision, and I ended up getting a really interesting job offer about a year later, and actually became the CEO of a cryptocurrency startup for about a year. So that was a different adventure. Yeah. But that step into Money Instigator was the beginning of my interest in coaching. And so I decided to actually go and get certified and take the courses and hold a much tighter container than what I had been doing originally. And I absolutely love watching people's lives shift and expand, and like aligning yourself with someone's vision for their best lives. It's very exciting.
Yeah. Yep.
And to be honest, it's often around money. So it's often around money, which, I mean, it goes without saying, it's something we're all, in need of to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, whether you like it or not, or think it's right or wrong, that's the world we live in. And I mean, you could certainly make a lot of arguments that, the world would be better without the whole money issue. But it is what it is. And so in order to live the life that you want and pursue your dreams it's just a fundamental part of the whole thing, which I think is good to accept and pay attention to. And I think for the most part we do. It's just how we look at it, like you were saying earlier. It's what is that perspective? And for a lot of people, that perspective is that they can't do what you've done. It's that they have to get a job and they have to stay there and get promoted and stick around until retirement. I mean, that's getting to be an old paradigm, but for a long time that was the belief. And there are a lot of people still telling their children that's what you should do. So the world's dramatically changing, of course. But I like the way you took opportunities and ran with them and learned from them and then went on to something else. And as you talk about it, it doesn't seem like you were particularly phased by that. I mean, you saw an opportunity, you took it. What was the, was there any decision-making process that you went through?
In terms of which decision? Sorry.
Any of them, because you did make a lot of changes, it sounds like. And so
yeah.
just, was it just your gut telling you this is right? Was it, a pros and cons list? How did you decide to make those kinds of changes that are hard for a lot of people?
No, they're very hard. And leaving my world and my job in New York City when I was in my early 30s and moving to Phil Tucky out in the middle of the boonies of Pennsylvania was extremely challenging of a decision. But I couldn't see a way forward any other way. I was too scared to just and go buy a place because I have people that I've met over the years who I call real estate mentors, and they would say, just go buy something. And I was too terrified, to be honest. It just seemed daunting. I mean, now it's funny. I buy places occasionally without ever even having seen them.
Yeah.
Because if you know the market and you know value, you're like, that's an excellent deal.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I just knew that I needed tomorrow to be more grounded and more secure. Mm-hmm. And I mean, financial insecurity in the future was absolutely driving me. Mm-hmm. And I have the liberty of not having dependents. Mm-hmm. It was a choice that I made a long time ago. And so I think to some degree, there's greater freedom there. Sure. And you can take bigger risks because at the end of the day, it's impacting just me. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm stressed out, that's a lot easier than stressing out a family, right, or children.
Yeah. Yeah, super interesting. So I love that you got into coaching because I can relate to the excitement around partnering with somebody and transforming lives and watching that happen for people. What prompted the book that you've written?
So the book, The Big Power of Tiny, yeah, you got it. Perfect. Love it. The Big Power of Tiny Connections is an interesting outcropping of time on one's hands during COVID. I feel like everyone wrote a book during COVID, and
I jumped
on a bandwagon. Yeah. And it was interesting. I was in a writer's group, and the group was asked basically to pinpoint what our special sauce as a human was. And it was a visual exercise that involved drawing and lots of colors. And in the end, my special sauce boiled down to being somewhat of a Mary Poppins character. I want to be in the right place at the right time with just the right thing that you happen to need. It might be a needle and thread in the middle of the desert. It might be snacks at 2 a.m. in a nightclub. Random stuff will come out of my purse. And the insight in that was like, what makes me tick? And it's connecting with people in moments where there's an exchange. And, I take it for granted how I do it. And someone in the writers group, probably, Azul, who's the leader, he probably said something along the lines of, can you explain to others how you move through the world? If that, because you do it differently. And so I thought, that's interesting. And so the book, The Big Power of Tiny Connections, is basically an exploration into, if you looked at every single person as a discovery, as a gift, knowing that they each had the potential to change your life the same way you have the potential to change theirs. How do you then step into these interactions with people? Like, how do you talk to the person getting, a coffee next to you who's like looked up and smiled, or the person sitting next to you on the plane, or the person in line in front of you at, a football game? Like, how do you take these little moments and turn them into big things? And, just as an example, someone's reading my book and texted me the page on which I said, lines are a great place to connect with people. And I said, I, haven't had too many interesting interactions, but one of my oldest friends was made while I was standing in line in Paris for housing insurance back in college. And he sent me a whole story about how he was standing in line to get a drink, and he started chatting with this guy, and they were talking about the Oscars. Fast forward to the next day, my friend got invited to the Oscars as a result of this chat in a line, and they got him into an after party. So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
All just from random interactions. So the book really is, it's an ode to how to thrive. And there's a chapter in there called Tiny connections will help you get a better job.
I love that. And I believe that. I mean, connecting and networking, it seems to be about 80% of the people who do get a job have gotten it through some kind of networking. So is this,
especially at the big companies? You're exactly right, Michelle. 90% of people get those jobs at companies like Apple, IBM, Samsung. You list basically a hot company, those people are being put forward through referrals. So it's really who you know.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That is so important for people to hear. And of course, there's kind of that gap between understanding that and trying to navigate that. So, when somebody listening is hearing you say that, are they thinking, well, I don't know what they're thinking. They might be thinking, well, I don't know anybody at these big companies. But that's not really what you're saying, that you have to have a good friend who's already at the company. What are some ideas for people who are thinking, well, too bad for me. I don't know anybody at any big companies.
I mean, obviously LinkedIn is a wonderful resource because you might be connected, 3 people away. So start building the steps that bring you closer to the person that will actually be able to get you in. One of the ideas that I share in the book is, look on social media, see where different people from that company go for drinks. What sporting events does the company support or attend? Get crafty. I mean, if you're hungry, don't let the fact that you don't know anybody at a company stop you.
Yeah.
Make it a goal and, allocate hours every week to making that a reality. Absolutely possible.
Yeah, I love that. So is the book designed for people looking for jobs? What is it designed, or is it just designed for people to have a happier, better life?
Yeah, the book is a fun read because you can pick it up. It's very snackable. You can read the chapters that appeal to you. It's really a proof that connecting to the people in the world around us is the most powerful thing that we can do to thrive. Like, the book really just breaks it all down. And, I talk about being a better person. I talk about getting invited to more parties. I talk about, a whole range of things that make people happy, even getting laid. Because at the end of the day, I mean, that's some serious connection.
Yeah, I love this. And, I love the fact that you said the book was snackable, because I have certain books that I know if I wake up in the morning and I just feel kind of like something's off, you need something, and you've meditated, you've journaled, you still need something. So I have certain books that you just literally like open to a page. It doesn't matter what it is. You close your eyes and open the book and you read. And just like you were saying, you get what you needed. it's like magic. It happens all the time, but I have certain books that I go to. So I feel like yours could be one of them where, you don't need to read it like a regular book. You can open a page and get something out of it that you need that day.
Yeah,
So,
and I love those types of books too. I call them like divinal books where
oh,
you can just
good.
crack it and say like, what do I need right now? Yes, love that.
Yeah, and if people haven't tried that, it's remarkable how interesting that can be. Um, so yeah, wonderful. I love that. And um, it's the big book of tiny connections. What is a tiny connection? I know I get that that's like meeting somebody in line. Are there some other examples of tiny connections?
I mean, tiny connections. So the big power of tiny connections is just any interaction with the world around you.
Mm-hmm.
It could be even chatting at the airport to the person who's checking you in. Um, it could be following up with regards to something that you're curious about. It's his connection, but for you, it's a tiny tributary that's going to take your life on a different path.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really trying to support people's curiosity,
Mm,
about like where can things go if I lean into the connections that are all around me all the time,
that's a
you
great
know?
question. Yeah, where can things go? That's a super great question to ask yourself. And I love the fact that you're so curious because curiosity is another, I think, characteristic of people who um, create a lot in their life. How do you use curiosity in your own life? You've mentioned it a couple of times, but is it conscious or is it just kind of who you are and how you roll?
I think it's conscious, but I mean, I'm a normal person. I suffer from not wanting to go out, not wanting to push the limits, just the same way everybody else does. And in chapter 2, I actually like walk through all the excuses you could possibly imagine that people have, that hold them back from meeting more people, from going to that work function, from getting on a Zoom networking Zoom that they may not be in the mood for. And I ask questions. So for me, I sometimes, if I'm struggling, I'll force myself to do a trade-off. I'll say, okay, you can go for 40 minutes and you're going to attend whatever it is, and in exchange, you know uh, it might be dessert, or it might be a Netflix show that I'm in the middle of binging. I get rewarded. So I will bribe myself to do the things that maybe I'm not quite in the mood for. Um, because, we're all human at the end of the day, and nobody wants to be social and push it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, curiosity, I think it's sort of in the fabric. I really do always wonder what's around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
What's that person's like? What's that person's home like? I'm just fascinated with the world.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. And I agree. It usually is pretty rewarding when you push yourself past those excuses. And, you get in that practice and then you kind of know when the excuses are coming and that they're excuses versus real reality. Um, and I love that when you can make yourself do it anyway, and then you come away from it just going, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did that. I almost didn't do it. I had that recently where I was like this close to turning, like going to a particular function and then leaving because I couldn't find parking, and the excuses just started coming, and I made myself figure it out. And oh my gosh, I was just so glad that I did it. And when after the fact, you're thinking, what was that about? I couldn't find parking. I mean, big deal. I spent an extra 5 minutes. So I think it's so important just to have an awareness of kind of how we operate and the way our brains will try to get us out of a new situation or something. So yeah, super interesting.
No, I think it's just being human, right? We all have that moment where we have to negotiate with ourselves. And I think at the end of the day, curiosity is intrinsically positive. I think,
Mm-hmm.
it's what makes me an excellent coach, because, I'm curious about what's going on, and I can,
Right.
ask great questions. And it's one of the things I love about my coach.
Mm-hmm.
He's intrinsically curious. So I think it's definitely something that's a powerful attribute in people.
Yeah. Thank you. So, what type of coaching are you doing? Coaching is, it's a big wide world. Are you?
It is a big wide world. So I work with female entrepreneurs who are 35 to 50 who are really trying to shift into greater both greater abundance and greater output. So they just really want to create their mark on the earth, and they're very excited to bring their vision alive. So I partner with them, and then my corporate coaching is very much around how do you connect with your employees? How do you build a connected workplace in this disconnected world that we're living in? Like, we've lost our photocopier moments, we've lost our water cooler moments. Like, how do we stay feeling connected? Because everyone's quitting, right? And
Right.
61% of people will say that they would turn down a higher paying offer if they have 5 or more friends at their current job. So it's very much about creating, a happier milieu for the people where they feel connected. Because when they feel connected, they're happier, they're more productive, and if they're more productive, the company's goals are being better met, right?
Absolutely.
So it's awesome. And I also do masterful storytelling trainings, which almost is a no-brainer, because throughout my book, I have, each chapter has a section called Let Me Tell You a Story. And I tell people stories from my life, stories from people that I've interviewed lives, just really interesting random connections that changed people's paths.
So if we want to be a better storyteller, if we read your book, will we just see kind of how you're telling the stories? Or do you get into sort of technique on storytelling?
No, I don't talk about storytelling in the book at all, actually. The book is more, but I do talk about, there are some fundamentals about connecting that I touch on. For instance, listening, that's an interesting one. And actually, in the researching of the book, I had no idea that the reason we don't teach listening in most places, but more schools are starting to teach it, is it was always assumed when the school curriculums were being written that if you could read, then you could listen. I mean, those two things are completely not aligned, but it's a fascinating assumption, isn't it?
Yeah, fascinating. Really interesting.
Yeah. So besides listening, I give everything from icebreakers to, I really try and inspire people to look at moments in their lives in different ways. And I mean, I'm very vulnerable. So for instance, I have 2 step-kids in Pennsylvania, and they were at that soccer phase when I came into their lives. And so suddenly I was a soccer mom, and I was not happy about it. And in the book, I talk about how I really missed out on some entertaining opportunities that I should have leaned into instead of sort of not being excited about having to drive the kids to soccer. I should have made a picture of mimosas or virgin mimosas, grabbed some paper cups, and, run around and made friends, because in hindsight, all of those parents were opportunities for jobs, parties, friends, and connections. So I really missed out. And then I talk about that in the book.
I love that you said that, because sometimes when I'll be talking to somebody about networking, and they're sort of like, oh, I hate those chamber meetings and what, but that, networking can happen literally anywhere. And those are great places. Those other parents, at the soccer game, they have amazing connections themselves. And so, yeah, that's so important to say that.
And they're captive audiences, and you're going to see them regularly.
Right.
But I mean, and that's the thing, the book talks, so I don't use the word networking because I think a lot of people dislike it, because of course it's got the word working in it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, to me, when you make a connection, it sounds exciting, right? Oh, I made a connection.
Right.
Oh, we connected. It's always very positive when people say that. So I'm really trying to support people to see the world in a slightly different way and realize how many interesting places there are to link into the world around them.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a sense of abundance that just comes from, making those connections. So whether it leads to more money or a job, or, I mean, there's still, a greater abundance from just having made the connection. So it's got so much value in itself, before it even, has the opportunity to take you to new places. So it was really important, and I'm so glad you wrote the book, and I'm so glad that people are hearing about it. Anything else you'd like people to know about better connections, better communication, the storytelling you bring up? Are you suggesting that people generally get to be better storytellers? What is that about?
Okay, so the storytelling training. So if you want your sales team to win more pitches, to upsell more often, you really need to support audience-centered communication. And what is the foundation of great audience-centered communication? Masterful storytelling. Like how your words land when you're sharing them, how your deck, even if it's about, grommets that you're selling, how that deck reads and the narrative and how it weaves in, all sorts of thoughts. That's very, very powerful. So that's what I teach. And, storytelling is founded in the 5 main story archetypes. I talk about, being calm, because 41% of people hate speaking in public, and still Zoom meetings are speaking in public for many, and I talk about, how to really realize the stories that are going to land with your audience so that you make the win and that you take that pitch home. So it's powerful stuff.
Yeah. And how do people learn how to do this with you?
So it's really interesting. I do about a 4.5-hour group training, and then everyone gets 2 30-minute one-on-one coaching sessions. So it's very intimate, and it's really, it next levels their presentation skills and their masterful capability around understanding stories. And so the whole thing just comes together, and it's about a week long for 25 people.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's fantastic, because that is something that I think everybody needs, and it's being talked about a lot, the power of storytelling, but there is an art to it. It's not like you can necessarily just, I mean, some people are probably more natural at it, but there is an art to it. And so that's great that you're teaching people to do that.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's interesting, considering having spent decades in the world of advertising.
Yeah.
They generally don't ever really give people presentation skill training, which is very surprising. I think they just sort of figure everybody's flying by the seat of their pants.
Yeah, that is interesting, actually.
Yeah.
And I do find that as much as we've come into our lives starting out hearing stories, and we hear them forever, we don't typically take the time to really break it down and unpack what makes a good story and what doesn't. And yeah, I'm very aware of this, because my daughter's always commenting, and now my stories are too long and they're too boring. So anyway, I need to take your course. But yeah, tell us how else people can connect with you and work with you. And obviously they can get your book.
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Chapters, etc. And you can always ask for your local bookstore to order it in, support local.
Yep.
And if they want to reach out or they're interested in hearing more, you can head over to jennash.com, JENNASH.com. Super easy.
That's great. And so jennash.com, you've got your other coaching services and the storytelling and all of that is on there. Okay.
Yeah, it's all there. Yeah. Super easy.
Yeah, fantastic. Your timing is so right with the way the world is right now. I think there's such a need for all of this. And are you any message for those remote workers out there who have lost their connection? Any final uplifting word for them?
I would encourage them to be as vocal as possible with their managers and HR. And if they're feeling disconnected, I would ask to find out what the company's doing to help them feel more supported and more integrated. There's lots that companies can do and should be doing. And, companies don't want you to leave. So if you're unhappy or you're feeling stressed or you're sad, and you don't have anyone to connect with, at your company, ask ask them what they're going to do for you because you're struggling. And at the end of the day, I think it's really interesting because companies are struggling so much to keep their employees in place. All of a sudden, conversations that 5 years ago were not okay are suddenly okay. You want to work less hours. Okay. You want to take a sabbatical. Okay. You want maybe to do job sharing with someone else because you're just a little overwhelmed for the next 6 months. It's amazing the stuff that companies are supporting because they've realized how expensive it is to replace employees, and retention right now is just everything.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great time, I think, to be actually either an employee or a job transitioner because there are amazing new things happening. And yeah, I love the changes. I mean, I just look back to the beginning of my corporate career and just how different the workplace is and the potential it has to be even better. And yeah, the world is changing in the right way, that way, I believe. So, well, Jen, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate the time with you, and I'm sure the listeners got a great deal out of what you have to say. And certainly, listeners, get the book and check that out, and check Jen out at jennash.com and see how else you can work with her and learn from her. You have some really interesting things to say and some, a really great history. And I think that you're a good example of living a limit-free life. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, that is very kind, and thank you for your time and your awesome questions. And I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Well, listeners, thank you so much for being here. This is the Money and You Show. We broadcast live from ubngo.com. Can't talk anymore. On Monday nights at 7. And then you'll find us on all the podcast platforms and on the Limit Free Life YouTube channel and wherever you find podcasts. So we love having you here, and you can find out more about me at limitfreelife.com. And if you are interested in hearing a little more about, how your money beliefs may be either blocking you or perhaps helping you, I have a great freebie on the website under the Money Mindset page that you can grab and learn a little more about your own relationship with money. So thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next week.